He thought she was just another victim when a racist cop smashes a federal judge's luxury car and tries to blackmail her. He unleashes a storm of instant justice that shocks everyone. Witness the takedown nobody saw coming as the hunter becomes the hunted in a stunning flip of power. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished hood of the Rolls-Royce as it glided through the city's less glamorous arteries. A silver ghost amidst the urban grit. Behind the wheel, Judge Talia Monroe allowed a fraction of her judicial composure to soften. It had been a grueling week presiding over a complex racketeering case, the details of which still clung to her thoughts like stubborn lint. The smooth purr of the engine was usually a balm, a transition from the austere world of federal law to the quiet sanctuary of her home. Today, however, that transition would be violently interrupted. The sudden, aggressive flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror was jarring, an unwelcome intrusion into her momentary peace. Talia's brow furrowed slightly. She ran a mental checklist: speed, signaling, lane discipline, all impeccable. She signaled, pulling over to the curb, her mind already shifting from judicial reflection to cautious civilian. Officer Kyle Brenner approached the Rolls-Royce with a swagger that spoke volumes before he ever uttered a word. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the luxury vehicle, then lingered on Talia with a palpable disdain. He was a man of medium build, his uniform stretched taut over a frame that suggested more time spent on power trips than power lifts. His face was a mask of ingrained suspicion, the kind that saw guilt before innocence, especially when confronted with the unexpected. "License and registration," Brenner barked, his voice needlessly loud, foregoing any semblance of professional courtesy. Talia retrieved the documents from her glove compartment, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She handed them over, her gaze steady, meeting his. There was no fear in her eyes, only a watchful calm that seemed to irritate Brenner further. He glanced at the license, then back at her, a smirk playing on his lips. "Judge Talia Monroe," he read, drawing out her name with a theatricality that bordered on mockery. "Fancy car for a public servant. Where'd you get something like this? This your husband's car? Sweetheart." Talia's expression remained impassive, though a chill touched her spine. The condescension, the immediate assumption, it was a familiar, ugly tune. "The vehicle is registered in my name. Officer, is there a reason I was stopped?" Brenner leaned against the door, his proximity an invasion of her space. "We've had reports of high-end vehicles being used to transport illicit goods in this area. You fit the profile." "Fit the profile," Talia repeated, her voice even, though a spark of indignation ignited within her. "Could you elaborate on that profile?" "Officer," his smirk widened, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "You know what I mean. Expensive car, cruising through a neighborhood where it doesn't belong. Driven by, well, someone like you." He tapped the roof of the Rolls-Royce with his knuckles. "These things attract attention. Not always the right kind." The implication hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken prejudice. Talia had faced discrimination before, in subtler, more insidious forms within the hallowed halls of justice. But this was raw, unfiltered, a blatant display of bigotry from a man sworn to uphold the law, not defile it with his personal biases. "Officer," Talia began, her tone a shade firmer, "I am a federal judge. I expect to be treated with a modicum of respect. If there is no legitimate reason for this stop, I suggest you allow me to proceed." Brenner scoffed, pushing himself off the car. "A federal judge, that's a good one. You think that title buys you a free pass?" He circled the front of the Rolls-Royce. His eyes narrowed, his demeanor growing more aggressive. He seemed to take her assertion of her position not as a statement of fact, but as a challenge to his authority. "Maybe you're one of those corrupt ones, the kind that takes bribes, lives high on the hog." He was now directly in front of the iconic grille, his face contorted in a sneer. "Or maybe you're just a front, a mule, moving things for people who don't like to get their own hands dirty." Talia watched him, her mind a whirl of outrage and cold calculation. This was escalating beyond a routine traffic stop, beyond even a typical case of racial profiling. This was a direct, personal assault fueled by pure, unadulterated prejudice. She could have produced her federal judge credentials, demanded his supervisor unleash the legal weight of her office right there on the grimy street. But a deeper, more strategic instinct stayed her hand. She needed to see how far he would go. She needed the full measure of his malice. "This is outrageous, officer," she stated, her voice devoid of the tremor that threatened to betray her anger. "You are making baseless accusations." Brenner laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Baseless lady, I know your type." He unclipped his heavy-duty flashlight from his belt, its metallic length glinting menacingly. Then, with a sudden, shocking movement, he swung it hard against the gleaming chrome of the Rolls-Royce's front headlight. The sound of shattering glass and tortured metal ripped through the air. Talia gasped, an involuntary reaction to the wanton destruction. The act was so brazen, so beyond the pale, it momentarily stunned her. Brenner wasn't finished. He brought the flashlight down again, this time on the hood, leaving a deep, ugly scar in the pristine silver paint. "See," he snarled, his face inches from her window, spittle flecking the glass. "Things get damaged, easily, just like reputations." He then delivered his final, venomous blow. "Here's the deal. You keep your mouth shut about this. No reports, no complaints. You just drive your fancy, dented car away and forget this ever happened. If I hear a peep, just one word, I'll make sure every newspaper in this city gets a tip about a certain federal judge caught up in a smuggling investigation. They'll have a field day. Your picture, your fancy car, all of it. Think about that." He stepped back, his chest puffed out, a caricature of power and menace. He clearly believed he had intimidated her into silence. Just another woman of color he could bully and discard. He had no idea of the storm he had just unleashed. Talia stared straight ahead, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Her face was a mask of stone, but behind her eyes, a firestorm raged. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He had mistaken her composure for weakness, her silence for fear. He was about to learn the profound difference. Officer Kyle Brenner gave the damaged car one last contemptuous look, then turned and sauntered back to his patrol vehicle. He didn't look back. In his small, hate-filled world, he had just put another uppity minority in her place. The moment his cruiser pulled away, Talia reached for her secure communications device. Her fingers surprisingly steady. She didn't dial 911. She didn't call the local police precinct. Her call went to a number the few possessed, a direct line that bypassed layers of bureaucracy and initiated immediate, decisive action at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. "This is Judge Talia Monroe," she said. She said, her voice low, controlled, yet imbued with an unmistakable authority that would have sent shivers down Brenner's spine had he heard it. "Code Indigo. I have an officer-involved incident, abuse of power, destruction of property, and attempted blackmail. Officer Kyle Brenner, local precinct. I need internal affairs. Now." The gears of justice, the real, formidable gears she commanded, began to turn. The shock everyone would soon feel wouldn't be at a racist cop's audacity, but at the swift, unwavering justice that was about to descend upon him, orchestrated by the very woman he had so grievously underestimated. The echo of Officer Brenner's departing cruiser faded, leaving Judge Talia Monroe in a silence that felt both vast and violated. The metallic scent of damaged chromework and the sight of the shattered headlight glass were stark, physical manifestations of the ugliness she had just confronted. Her call to internal affairs had been precise, devoid of the tremor of fury that vibrated deep within her. Now, in the charged stillness, as the invisible machinery of federal justice began to whir into motion on her behalf, her mind did not dwell on Brenner's snarling face, but on a memory, sharp and cold, from nearly 2 decades prior. It was this memory, and others like it, that had forged the steel in her spine and the ice in her veins when confronted with blatant bigotry. She wasn't always Judge Talia Monroe, a name that commanded respect in federal courthouses. Once, she was simply Talia Monroe, a young, ambitious prosecutor in a bustling and often deeply prejudiced Southern city. It was her first major felony trial, a young black man, Darius Washington, accused of armed robbery. The evidence was flimsy, circumstantial at best, resting heavily on a single, shaky eyewitness identification made under duress. Darius, barely out of his teens, had a public defender who seemed overwhelmed and outmatched. Talia, then a junior in the district attorney's office, had been assigned second chair, ostensibly to learn from the lead prosecutor, a veteran named Marcus Thorne, known for his conviction rates and his thinly veiled disdain for defendants who looked like Darius. From the outset, Talia felt a gnawing unease. Thorne presented the case with a theatrical flair, painting Darius as a hardened criminal, a menace to society. Despite his lack of any significant prior record, he played on stereotypes, his language subtly coded but undeniably effective in a courtroom with a predominantly white jury. Talia had spent nights poring over the case files, finding inconsistencies, overlooked alibi witnesses, avenues of investigation that had been prematurely closed. She had approached Thorne with her concerns, her voice earnest, perhaps naive. "Marcus," she'd said, laying out her notes, "don't you think we should look into this? The timeline for the alibi witness doesn't quite add up with the prosecution's theory if we consider." Thorne had cut her off, not with anger, but with a dismissive wave of his hand and a patronizing smile. "Talia, you're bright, but you're green. Our job is to secure a conviction. The police did their work. This is the guy. Don't go looking for problems where there aren't any. Besides," he'd added, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "you know how these cases go. He probably did something." The casual injustice of his words, the sheer, lazy cruelty of that assumption, had hit Talia like a physical blow. He probably did something. It was the same sentiment, cloaked in different words, that Officer Brenner had displayed today. The presumption of guilt based on appearance, on prejudice, not on facts or law. During the trial, Talia watched in growing horror as Thorne systematically demolished Darius's defense, not through superior evidence, but through innuendo and the exploitation of latent biases. He'd cross-examined Darius's mother, a hard-working woman trying to vouch for her son, with a condescending pity that made her seem unreliable. He'd emphasized Darius's neighborhood, his way of speaking, his attire at the time of his arrest, all irrelevant to the crime, yet all painting a picture for the jury. Talia had tried, once more, to intervene, to suggest a different line of questioning for a defense witness who could have potentially corroborated Darius's alibi more strongly. Thorne had looked at her then, his eyes hard. "Are you trying to win this case, Monroe, or are you trying to make friends with the defendant? Remember whose side you're on." The accusation that she wasn't loyal to the prosecution stung. But what stung more was the realization that their side felt increasingly like the wrong side. She was an officer of the court, sworn to seek justice, not just victories. The silence she maintained for the rest of that trial was not born of agreement, but of a chilling understanding of her own powerlessness within that specific context. She was a junior prosecutor, a black woman in a system dominated by men like Thorne. To openly defy him then, without irrefutable proof, would have been career suicide, and worse, it would not have saved Darius. She learned a bitter lesson sometimes. To fight the system, you had to first understand its currents, its hidden rocks, and its brutal undertows. You had to bide your time, gather your strength, and choose your battles with surgical precision. Darius Washington was convicted. The judge, an old contemporary of Thorne's, handed down a sentence that felt disproportionately harsh. Talia remembered seeing Darius's mother collapse into sobs, a sound of utter desolation that haunted her for years. That case became a defining moment. It was the moment Talia Monroe decided that if she were to remain in the legal profession, she would not be a cog in a machine that perpetuated injustice. She would become a force against it. She realized that outrage, however righteous, was not enough. To effect real change, she needed power, she needed authority, and she needed an unshakable command of the law, better than those who sought to twist it. Her composure in the face of Officer Brenner's racist tirade and vandalism was not passivity. It was the product of years of observing, learning, and steeling herself. She had learned from men like Thorne, and later from biased judges and defense attorneys, that a visible display of anger or distress from a black woman in a position of authority was often twisted, used against her, cited as proof of instability or an agenda. Her calm was a shield, but it was also a weapon. It allowed her to observe, to gather the evidence of their misconduct, to let them hang themselves with their own rope of prejudice, just as Brenner had done so spectacularly. She remembered the sneer on Thorne's face, so similar to Brenner's. She remembered the casual cruelty, the assumption of her complicity or her insignificance, the pain of Darius Washington's conviction. The weight of that systemic failure had never left her. It fueled her ambition, not for personal glory, but for a position from which she could ensure that no more Darius Washingtons were sacrificed on the altar of prejudice and expediency. As she sat in her damaged Rolls-Royce, the indignation from Brenner's assault was not just about a smashed headlight or a dented hood. It was about the desecration of the principles she had dedicated her life to upholding. Brenner's actions were a microcosm of the very corruption and abuse of power she fought every day from the bench. His attempt to blackmail her, to silence her with threats, was an echo of the way the system often tried to silence inconvenient truths. But now she was not the junior prosecutor. She was the federal judge. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Her silence earlier had been strategic, allowing Brenner to fully incriminate himself. Her action now would be decisive and rooted in the full authority of the law she wielded, the memory of Darius Washington, and the pain of that early, bitter lesson. Didn't paralyze her, it propelled her. It was why, when she made that call, her voice was not the shriek of a victim, but the measured command of a judge demanding justice. The fight was no longer just about her car or her dignity. It was about the sanctity of the law itself. A sanctity Brenner had so ignorantly and arrogantly defiled. The immediate aftermath of the call to federal internal affairs was a blur of controlled efficiency. Within 20 minutes, an unmarked vehicle carrying two plainclothed investigators, Special Agents Davies and Miller, arrived not at the scene of the incident, but discreetly at a prearranged secure location a few blocks away. Talia, having moved her damaged Rolls-Royce into a private garage, met them, her composure still intact, though the adrenaline from the encounter with Brenner was beginning to wane, leaving a residue of cold anger. She recounted the events with meticulous detail, her judicial training evident in the clarity and precision of her statement. There was no embellishment, no emotional plea, just the unvarnished facts of Officer Brenner's conduct of profiling, the derogatory language, the unprovoked destruction of property, and the explicit threat of blackmail. Davies, a seasoned agent with tired eyes, listened intently, taking copious notes, while Miller, younger and more visibly disturbed by the account, handled the preliminary photography of the damage to her vehicle, his expression grim. "Judge Monroe," Davies said, his voice neutral, "this is a disturbing account. We will, of course, investigate thoroughly and swiftly. Officer Brenner's patrol unit will have GPS data, and his body cam footage, if activated, will be critical." He did not appear to have a body cam activated, Talia stated. Or if he did, he made no announcement of it, which I believe is departmental policy. "We'll ascertain that," Davies affirmed. "Given your position, Judge, this will be handled with the utmost seriousness and confidentiality, at least initially, to protect the integrity of the investigation." Talia nodded. "I expect nothing less. I also expect that Officer Brenner will be identified and located without delay, His behavior suggests a pattern, not an isolated lapse in judgment. The agents assured her that Brenner would be their immediate priority. As they departed, the reality of what had occurred began to settle upon Talia in a new way. It wasn't just the personal violation, but the potential ramifications within the system she served. She was a federal judge, a symbol of the law's impartiality. For that symbol to be so crudely attacked by a street-level officer was an affront that resonated far beyond her damaged car. The next morning, Talia attempted to immerse herself in her judicial duties. The racketeering case was entering its final stages, requiring her full attention. Yet, the encounter with Brenner cast a pall over everything. As she reviewed briefs and prepared for court, she found her mind drifting back to the sneer on his face, the sound of shattering glass. It was an unwelcome intrusion, a stark reminder that the very system she represented could harbor such blatant contempt for the principles it purported to uphold. The first hint of covert friction came not from internal affairs, who remained professional and communicative, but from an unexpected source. During a brief recess, she received a call from Judge Harrison, the chief judge of her district. Harrison was an older man, a veteran of the bench, generally supportive but also a staunch institutionalist, deeply concerned with the public image of the judiciary. "Talia," he began, his voice laced with a careful sort of concern that immediately put her on alert. "I heard about an incident, a rather unfortunate encounter with local PD. Davies from IA gave me a courtesy heads up, very discreet. Of course." "Yes, there was an incident, Chief Judge," Talia confirmed, keeping her tone even. "A serious one." "So I gather," Harrison said. There was a pause. "Talia, I don't need to tell you how sensitive these matters are. An officer accused by a federal judge, it's a delicate situation. Public perception is paramount." Talia felt a familiar tightening in her chest. "The perception I am concerned with. Chief Judge, is that an officer of the law felt empowered to racially profile, damage property, and attempt to blackmail a citizen, regardless of her profession? The fact that the citizen was a federal judge merely underscores the audacity and impunity with which he acted." Of course," Harrison said, a placating note in his voice. "No one is excusing the officer's alleged behavior, but we must also consider optics. Are you absolutely certain about the racial component sometimes? Officers can be overzealous. Poor judgment rather than outright bigotry." Talia's grip on her phone tightened. "Chief Judge Harrison," she said, her voice dropping a register, becoming unmistakably firm. "I have been a black woman my entire life. I am intimately familiar with the nuances of racial prejudice. Officer Brenner's words and actions were not merely overzealous. They were explicitly racist. He commented on my race in relation to my vehicle and my presence in that neighborhood. He used derogatory and dismissive language consistent with racial bias. There is no ambiguity." Harrison cleared his throat. "Well, that is your assessment, and IA will certainly look into it. I merely counsel caution in how this is framed. We wouldn't want it to appear as if the judiciary is launching an indiscriminate attack on law enforcement, especially given current tensions. It could be misconstrued, become a media circus." The implication was clear: her identity, her experience, was being subtly questioned, minimized. The institution, in its desire to avoid controversy, was already trying to manage the narrative, perhaps at the expense of the unvarnished truth. It was a form of systemic exploitation, the pressure to downplay her own victimization for the sake of institutional peace. "With all due respect, Chief Judge," Talia replied, her voice like chilled steel, "my concern is not avoiding a media circus. My concern is justice. Officer Brenner's actions were an attack on the rule of law, and I expect the system to respond accordingly. Without fear or favor, and certainly without attempting to dilute the racial animus that fueled his conduct." There was a strained silence on the other end. "Very well, Talia," Harrison said finally, his tone cooler now. "IA will proceed. Keep me informed." The call left Talia with a profound sense of disquiet. If the chief judge of her own district was already subtly pushing back, suggesting she temper her account, what other, more covert obstacles lay ahead? It was a stark reminder that even with her authority, the pervasive nature of systemic bias meant she would likely have to fight for her own truth to be fully acknowledged. Later that day, another smaller incident reinforced this unease. A law clerk, a bright young woman Talia was mentoring, approached her with a hesitant expression. "Judge," she began, "I overheard some clerks from another chamber discussing, well, they heard a rumor about you in a police stop. They were saying it's hard to believe a cop would just act like that with a federal judge unless there was some misunderstanding or maybe provocation." Talia looked at her clerk, a young woman of color herself, whose eyes now held a mixture of concern and perhaps a dawning understanding of the challenges Talia faced. "And what do you think, Miss Chen?" Miss Chen met her gaze. "I think, Judge, that they don't understand what it's like to be profiled, and they certainly don't know you." Talia offered a small, weary smile. "Thank you, Miss Aves Chen. That means a great deal. The truth has a way of asserting itself. Eventually, we just have to ensure it has the opportunity." But the casual gossip, the immediate instinct of some within her own professional sphere to doubt her, to rationalize the aggressor's behavior, was telling. It was the soft underbelly of systemic discrimination, the skepticism, the reluctance to believe the victim, especially when the victim was a woman of color and the accused was part of the dominant power structure. Talia knew then that simply reporting Brenner and letting the system take its course wouldn't be enough. The evidence-based justice she believed in required not just evidence of Brenner's guilt, but a proactive dismantling of the subtle narratives that might seek to excuse or minimize his actions. Her fight was not just against one rogue officer, but against the insidious biases that allowed such officers to flourish. The conversation with Harrison, the overheard whispers among clerks, these were not direct attacks, but they were the systemic antibodies already reacting to a foreign agent, a black woman in power demanding accountability from one of their own. The tension was rising, not just for Brenner, but for Talia herself as she navigated a system that was, in part, being tested by her very presence and her unwavering demand for justice. The days following the incident with Officer Brenner and the disquieting conversation with Chief Judge Harrison were fraught with a subtle tension that permeated Talia Monroe's professional life. Internal Affairs was proceeding with their investigation, providing her with regular, if carefully worded, updates. They had confirmed Brenner's identity, his patrol route that day, and, crucially, that his body cam had not been activated. This last piece of information, while not surprising to Talia, was a significant point for IA. As departmental policy mandated activation during all public interactions, Brenner, when initially questioned by IA, had been reportedly arrogant, dismissive, and had denied any significant altercation, claiming it was a routine traffic stop and that Judge Monroe had been agitated and uncooperative. He made no mention of damaging her vehicle or any threats. Talia knew this was a critical juncture. Brenner's denial, coupled with the subtle pressures she felt from within the judicial hierarchy to downplay the racial animus, meant that her word, even as a federal judge, might be pitted against an officer's in a way that could dilute the truth. She needed something more, something undeniable. The damage to her Rolls-Royce was evidence. Yes, but Brenner could try to concoct a story for that, perhaps alleging she damaged it herself later out of spite. The blackmail threat was her word against his. She continued her duties on the bench, her demeanor as composed and authoritative as ever. But beneath the surface, a plan was beginning to form, a way to move beyond merely reacting to the system and instead proactively leveraging it. She wouldn't let Brenner, or the subtle biases that protected men like him, win. The unexpected aid came not from a powerful colleague or a dramatic uncovering of new evidence by IA, but from a seemingly minor source, a young, nervous law assistant named Marcus Cole. Cole worked in the city's public defender's office, a place Talia knew was often overwhelmed and under-resourced. He had no direct connection to her or her current predicament. Cole had been trying to get an appointment to see Judge Monroe for several days. His request routed through her judicial assistant. The reason stated was to provide potentially relevant information regarding an officer currently under IA investigation. Given the sensitivity, her assistant had initially been cautious, but something in the urgency of Cole's repeated requests made Talia agree to a brief, off-the-record meeting in her chambers. Marcus Cole was slight, with anxious eyes that darted around her imposing chambers. He clutched a worn briefcase to his chest as if it contained state secrets. "Judge Monroe," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for seeing me. I know this is highly irregular." "Mr. Cole," Talia said, her voice calm and encouraging. "My assistant mentioned you might have information pertinent to an ongoing IA investigation. Please, speak freely." Cole took a deep breath. "It's about Officer Kyle Brenner. Judge, I heard through the grapevine, you know how word travels, that he was involved in an incident, a serious one, and that IA is looking at him." Talia nodded slowly. "That is correct." "Well, Judge," Cole continued, his nervousness palpable. "I had an encounter with Officer Brenner about 6 months ago. I was working late, preparing for a trial, and I was on my way home. He pulled me over. My taillight was out. A legitimate stop, I suppose. But he was aggressive, demeaning." Cole, who was also African-American, visibly swallowed. "He made comments about my car, which isn't much, but he implied I couldn't afford it legitimately. He asked if I was dealing drugs. He searched my car without consent, dumped my case files all over the passenger seat, and then—" Cole hesitated, his gaze dropping to his briefcase. "He found a small, legally prescribed bottle of anxiety medication I take. It has my name, the pharmacy, everything." He held it up, sneering, and said, "Look at this, a nervous little lawyer. Bet your clients would love to know their mouthpiece is popping pills to keep it together." He then told me that if I ever filed a complaint about his conduct, he'd make sure that information, twisted to sound like I was an unstable drug abuser, found its way to the Bar Association and my supervising attorney. Talia listened, her expression unreadable but her focus intense. This was it, a pattern, the same modus operandi: abuse of power, baseless accusations, and then a threat of reputational damage to ensure silence. "Did you report him?" "Mr. Cole?" Talia asked quietly. Cole shook his head, shamefaced. "No, Judge, I was scared. I'm just an assistant public defender. My career is just starting. A mark like that, an accusation of drug abuse, even if untrue, it could destroy everything. I couldn't risk it. I fixed the taillight and prayed I'd never see him again." "Why are you coming forward now?" Talia inquired, her voice gentle. "Because when I heard it was you he targeted, Judge Monroe, a federal judge, I realized this man is out of control. If he'd do that to you, he'd do it to anyone. And I thought maybe my story, even if I was too scared to tell it then, could help now. Maybe it could show this isn't a one-time thing for him." He paused, then added with a surge of courage, "And honestly, Judge, seeing your name, knowing someone with your power was also a target, it made me feel a little less alone, a little less cowardly for not speaking up sooner." Talia felt a profound sense of gratitude towards this young man. He was risking his career. Even now, by coming forward, his fear was understandable. The power imbalance between a rookie law assistant and a street cop like Brenner was immense. His testimony, if he was willing to give it formally, would be a critical piece of corroborating evidence, demonstrating Brenner's established pattern of intimidation and blackmail. "Mr. Cole," Talia said, her voice resonating with a warmth that surprised him, "what you are doing takes immense courage, far more than you realize. Your information is not just potentially relevant, it is vital. Officer Brenner used almost identical tactics with me, including a threat to damage my reputation through the media." Cole's eyes widen. He did to you? Yes, Talia confirmed. He is a predator who uses his badge to intimidate and silence. Your account helps establish that beyond any doubt. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement to Internal Affairs? I can ensure you have full protection against any retaliation. And I will personally see to it that your bravery is recognized, not penalized. A visible wave of relief washed over Marcus Cole. The validation, the promise of protection from a figure as powerful as Judge Monroe, seemed to lift a heavy weight from his shoulders. Yes, Judge, I will. I want to. He needs to be stopped. This was the first significant crack in Brenner's wall of denial. Cole's testimony would directly contradict Brenner's narrative that he was a professional officer and that his interaction with Talia was an isolated misunderstanding. It painted a picture of a repeat offender, a bully who preyed on those he perceived as vulnerable, regardless of their actual station. Talia immediately contacted Special Agent Davies. Agent Davies, she said, I have a witness, a previous victim of Officer Brenner, subjected to a similar pattern of intimidation and attempted blackmail. His name is Marcus Cole, an assistant public defender. He is willing to give a formal statement. There was a moment of silence on Davies' end. Then, Judge, this is extremely helpful. A pattern of behavior significantly strengthens the case. We'll contact Mr. Cole immediately. Thank you. When Marcus Cole left her chambers, he walked with a straighter posture, his fear replaced by a determined resolve. For Talia, his unexpected appearance was a turning point. It wasn't just about her word against Brenner's anymore. It was about a vulnerable individual, someone the system might have otherwise overlooked, finding the courage to step forward, aided by the fact that even the powerful could be targeted. This first act of resistance, initiated by Cole and facilitated by Talia, was about to inject a powerful dose of undeniable evidence into the investigation, setting the stage for a much larger confrontation. The ground was shifting. The addition of Marcus Cole's testimony sent ripples through the Internal Affairs investigation. Special Agent Davies confirmed that Cole's statement was detailed, credible, and disturbingly similar to Judge Monroe's account in terms of Officer Brenner's methodology of intimidation and blackmail. They now had a pattern, a clear indication that Brenner wasn't just an officer who had a single bad day. He was a systemic problem. IA moved faster now. They subpoenaed Brenner's disciplinary record from the local police department, which, while not pristine, had previously seen complaints dismissed due to insufficient evidence or lack of corroborating witnesses, a common fate for accusations against officers, with Cole's testimony. However, some older, dismissed complaints began to look different in retrospect. Though IA's immediate focus remained on the Monroe and Cole incidents, they also secured traffic camera footage from a street near where Talia was stopped, which, while not capturing the direct vandalism, did show Brenner's cruiser parked behind Talia's Rolls-Royce for an extended period, contradicting his claim of a brief, routine stop. The pieces were falling into place. Talia, meanwhile, had made a decision. The quiet, behind-the-scenes pressure she had felt from Chief Judge Harrison, the whispers among clerks, these were symptomatic of a system often too willing to protect its own image, sometimes at the cost of individual justice. She realized that for Brenner to be truly held accountable, and for a message to be sent, this couldn't remain a quiet IA investigation that ended with a dismissal or a slap on the wrist. The power dynamic needed to be publicly and irrevocably flipped. She requested a formal meeting with Chief Judge Harrison, Special Agent Davies, and the head of the local police department. Chief Wallace, a man known for his defensive posture when his officers faced criticism. Talia also made a highly unusual request that Officer Kyle Brenner be present. The request for Brenner's presence was met with resistance, particularly from Chief Wallace, who argued it was irregular and potentially prejudicial to his officer. Davies, however, backed Talia, stating that given the gravity of the accusations by a federal judge and a corroborating witness, direct confrontation, while controlled, might expedite the truth. Harrison, caught between protecting the judiciary's image and the undeniable weight of a fellow judge's serious complaint, reluctantly agreed. He stipulated that the meeting be strictly controlled, not a trial, but an opportunity for clarification. The meeting was set in a large conference room at the federal courthouse, a neutral ground, yet one where Talia's authority was palpable. Present were Judge Monroe, Chief Judge Harrison, Chief Wallace, Special Agent Davies, and a visibly nervous but defiant Officer Kyle Brenner, accompanied by his union representative. Marcus Cole was not present at this stage, his formal statement being his current involvement. Though Talia had ensured he was aware of the meeting and prepared for any future necessity, Brenner entered the room with a residual swagger, though it was somewhat diminished by the imposing presence of two federal judges and the lead IA investigator. He still wore the uniform that Talia remembered so vividly, a symbol of the authority he had so grotesquely abused. His eyes flickered towards Talia, a flash of recognition, quickly masked by a sullen resentment. He clearly still underestimated her, perhaps believing this was just a formal dressing down, a bureaucratic hurdle. Chief Judge Harrison opened the meeting, his tone grave. This is an extraordinary meeting, convened to address serious allegations of misconduct against Officer Kyle Brenner of the City Police Department, specifically concerning an interaction with Judge Talia Monroe and a separate but related complaint by Mr. Marcus Cole. Chief Wallace interjected. Chief Judge, my officer maintains his innocence. He asserts the interaction with Judge Monroe was a standard traffic stop and that her vehicle was already damaged. He denies any threats or unprofessional conduct. As for Mr. Cole, that sounds like a disgruntled citizen with an old grudge. Talia listened calmly, her gaze fixed on Brenner. Then, she spoke, her voice clear and cutting, devoid of emotion but laden with an undeniable authority. Officer Brenner, she began, on the afternoon of date of incident, you stopped my vehicle. You accused me of fitting a profile for transporting illicit goods. You made derogatory comments about my race and my gender in relation to my ownership of a Rolls-Royce. Is that not correct? Brenner shifted in his seat. I stopped a vehicle that seemed out of place. I asked routine questions. You were uncooperative. Uncooperative. Talia's eyebrow arched slightly. Or was I merely questioning the basis for your stop? Let's move to the damage. You claim my vehicle was already damaged. Are you stating, for the record, that you did not strike my headlight and hood with your flashlight or any other object? Absolutely not, Brenner stated, his voice a little too loud. I wouldn't damage citizen property. That's a lie. Special Agent Davies then spoke. Officer Brenner, we have traffic camera footage placing your vehicle behind Judge Monroe's for over 20 minutes. Your initial report to your precinct, filed only after IA became involved, claimed a brief interaction. Can you explain that discrepancy? Brenner stammered. Oh, well, sometimes these things take longer. Verifying information. Talia pressed on. Officer Brenner, after damaging my vehicle, you explicitly threatened to leak a fabricated story to the press about me being involved in a smuggling investigation if I reported your conduct. Do you deny making that threat? That's an outrageous accusation, Brenner blustered, his face reddening. I never threatened anyone. Just like you never threatened Mr. Marcus Cole 6 months ago, Talia countered, her voice like ice. Just like you never told him you would spread rumors about his alleged drug abuse to the Bar Association if he complained about your abuse-free search of his vehicle in person. Brenner's eyes darted towards his union rep, a flicker of panic now evident. He had clearly not been prepared for Marcus Cole's complaint to be brought into this so directly, linked so explicitly to his encounter with Talia. I don't recall every minor traffic stop. He's making that up. This was the moment Talia had been waiting for. She had allowed him to commit to his lies, to deny everything in front of his own chief, a federal judge, and the IA investigator. Special Agent Davies, Talia said, turning to him, do you have the item we discussed? Davies nodded grimly. He reached into his briefcase and produced a small, clear evidence bag. Inside was a standard-issue police flashlight, its heavy metallic casing bearing microscopic, but identifiable, traces of silver, paint, and fragments of polycarbonate material. Officer Brenner, this is your duty flashlight, recovered from your patrol vehicle under warrant. Forensic analysis has found paint particles consistent with the unique finish of Judge Monroe's Rolls-Royce and polycarbonate fragments matching her headlight assembly. The lab report is conclusive. The damage to Judge Monroe's vehicle was caused by this specific flashlight. A stunned silence filled the room. Brenner stared at the flashlight, his face draining of color. His union rep looked aghast. Chief Wallace's jaw tightened, his defensive posture visibly crumbling. Chief Judge Harrison looked from the flashlight to Brenner, then to Talia, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. Talia continued, her voice relentless. So, Officer Brenner, you still maintain you didn't damage my car. You still maintain you didn't threaten me, because the physical evidence incontrovertibly proves you are lying about the former. And Mr. Cole's strikingly similar experience of being threatened by you strongly corroborates the latter. Brenner was speechless. He looked trapped, his bluster completely gone, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been shattered. The officer who had felt so empowered to humiliate and threaten a black woman on a public street, even one who identified herself as a judge, was now confronted with irrefutable evidence of his crimes. In a room full of people who held his fate in their hands, Chief Wallace cleared his throat, his voice strained. Officer Brenner, you are to surrender your badge and service weapon immediately. You are suspended pending the full outcome of this investigation and potential criminal charges. Brenner slumped in his chair, defeated. The witnesses in the room, his own chief, the chief judge, the IA investigator had seen his lies exposed, his authority stripped away not by a tirade or an emotional outburst, but by cold, hard facts and the calm, unwavering resolve of the woman he had victimized. Talia Monroe watched him, not with triumph, but with a somber satisfaction. This was not about revenge. This was about accountability. This was about evidence-based justice. The confrontation had been public enough within the necessary circles to ensure that the truth could not be buried or minimized. The witnesses were undeniable. The evidence was irrefutable. The power had indeed shifted, and the path to justice, not just for her, but as a message against the abuse of power, was now clear. The suspension of Officer Kyle Brenner was immediate, but it was only the beginning. The irrefutable forensic evidence from his flashlight, coupled with the mutually corroborating testimonies of Judge Talia Monroe and Assistant Public Defender Marcus Cole, created an unshakable foundation for both internal disciplinary action and criminal charges. Special Agent Davies and his team at Federal Internal Affairs moved swiftly to finalize their report, recommending Brenner's termination from the police force in the pursuit of criminal prosecution for abuse of power, destruction of property, and attempted blackmail. Chief Wallace, faced with the undeniable evidence presented in that explosive conference room meeting, had little choice but to act decisively. Any attempt to protect Brenner now would have invited accusations of a cover-up and further eroded public trust in his department. Within days, Kyle Brenner was formally dismissed from the City Police Department, the District Attorney's Office, armed with IA's comprehensive file, quickly filed criminal charges. The news of a federal judge being victimized by a racist cop, who then tried to blackmail her, only to be brought down by her own steely resolve and irrefutable evidence, was explosive. Despite Chief Judge Harrison's initial concerns about a media circus, the story broke, and it did indeed become a sensation, but not in the way Harrison had feared. Instead of undermining the judiciary, it highlighted the courage of one of its own and exposed a rot within local law enforcement. The national media descended. Judge Talia Monroe, who had always maintained a dignified, low public profile focused on her judicial work, found herself in reluctant symbol. Her name was on every news outlet. Her picture alongside images of her damaged Rolls-Royce and, eventually, a tight-lipped Kyle Brenner being led into court for his arraignment. Reporters camped outside her home and the federal courthouse. Talia handled the media storm with the same composure and precision she exhibited on the bench. She issued a single, carefully worded statement. The recent incident involving former Officer Brenner was a disturbing reminder that no one is above the law, and no one should be subjected to abuse of power, regardless of their station in life or the color of their skin. I have full faith that the justice system will address this matter thoroughly and fairly. My primary focus remains, as always, my duties as a federal judge and my commitment to upholding the Constitution for all citizens. She refused further interviews, letting the facts and the legal process speak for themselves. This dignified restraint only amplified her power and credibility in the public eye. She wasn't seen as a vengeful victim, but as a formidable guardian of the law who had been forced to turn her exacting standards onto an aggressor from within the system. Marcus Cole, initially terrified of the publicity, found himself unexpectedly lauded as a hero. His willingness to come forward, despite his vulnerability, was highlighted in many reports as a crucial act of bravery that helped expose Brenner's pattern of abuse. Judge Monroe made sure, through quiet channels, that the Public Defender's Office and the Bar Association were fully aware of Cole's courage and integrity, shielding him from any potential negative repercussions and, in fact, significantly bolstering his professional standing. He received messages of support from across the legal community. The community reaction was powerful and multifaceted. Civil rights groups hailed the case as a stark example of racial profiling and police misconduct, but also as a rare instance of swift accountability. There were protests outside the city police headquarters, not violent, but vocal, demanding further reforms and transparency. The hashtag #Justice for Judge Monroe trended, but it quickly evolved into broader calls for police reform. Brenner became the face of a problem many had long alleged but struggled to prove so conclusively. Inside the legal and judicial world, the impact was profound. Chief Judge Harrison, witnessing the public's overwhelmingly positive reaction to Talia's strength and the decisive action against Brenner, privately expressed his admiration for her handling of the situation. Admitting his earlier caution had been misplaced, his respect for Talia grew immensely. Other judges, some of whom might have previously harbored subtle biases or preferred to avoid such messy confrontations, saw in Talia a new kind of role model, one who did not shrink from confronting injustice, even when it came from within the ranks of law enforcement and even when it touched her personally. The trial of Kyle Brenner was a local sensation. The courtroom was packed every day. He pleaded not guilty, his defense attorney attempting to argue police stress, a momentary lapse of judgment, anything but the calculated malice the prosecution, armed with Talia's precise testimony and Cole's corroboration, laid bare. The forensic evidence of the flashlight was irrefutable. Talia took the stand, not as a judge this time, but as a victim and a key witness. Her testimony was a masterclass in clarity and composure. She simply stated the facts, her voice even, her gaze unwavering. When the defense attorney tried to imply she had been arrogant or had provoked Brenner, her calm, factual refutations only made him look foolish and desperate. Marcus Cole also testified, his initial nervousness giving way to a quiet confidence as he recounted his own experience with Brenner. The jury saw the pattern. They saw the abuse of power. The verdict came quickly guilty on all significant counts: felony destruction of property, official misconduct, and attempted blackmail. The judge presiding over Brenner's case, visibly moved by the evidence and the impact on the community, delivered a stern lecture on the betrayal of public trust before sentencing Brenner to a significant prison term, far exceeding what many had expected for a first-time conviction of a police officer. Justice, in this instance, was not just served, it was seen to be served. In the aftermath, Judge Talia Monroe returned to her courtroom, to the complex cases and the quiet work of interpreting law, but something had changed. She was no longer just a respected federal judge. She was a symbol, a symbol of courage in the face of bigotry, of the power of truth when wielded with precision, and of the fact that the system, for all its flaws and its capacity to protect its own, could also be made to work for justice, especially when individuals of integrity and power demanded it. Her damaged Rolls-Royce was repaired, its silver gleam restored. But the incident left an indelible mark, not as a scar, but as a reminder that the fight against injustice was ongoing, fought not just in high-profile cases against bosses or corrupt corporations, but sometimes on a city street, against a single officer embodying a pervasive prejudice. Talia Monroe had faced that prejudice, not with a shout, but with the quiet, unyielding force of the law itself. And in doing so, she had not only ensured justice for herself, but had also ignited a spark of hope and a renewed call for accountability that resonated far beyond her courtroom. The community saw that even the most entrenched power could be challenged, and that true justice, while often hard-won, was always worth the fight.